Good morning, everyone. I think we'll go ahead and get started. Welcome to Spatial Reasoning that engages young children. Just as a point of orientation, this slide deck is accessible on the bit.ly that you see on your front screen. And Paola, he'll be helping me out today. She's dropping that in the chat as well. And so it will be helpful as we go through our time together that you have access to that slide deck. So take a minute to click on that and be able to load up those slides. Well, let me introduce myself, then I'd like you to have an opportunity to introduce yourselves to each other. My name is Mark Alcorn. I'm a mathematics coordinator at the San Diego County Office of Education. I included my email there and my Twitter handle there. If you are interested in continuing the conversation after our time together today, please feel free to reach out. I'm super excited about spatial reasoning and working with young kids around it. I'll share some ideas around that. But I always enjoy continuing the conversation past experiences like this. So right now in the chat, if you could introduce yourself, please include your name, your role or position, and if you work with a school or an entire district, and then something you love about supporting extended learning. What gets you up in the morning about that? Let's introduce ourselves to each other. Thanks, everybody. Make sure you're reading what is getting people up in the morning with extended learning. It's so great to start a presentation with hearing what people are passionate about. Thanks for including that. Well, I'm so glad you're all here today. Let's go ahead and move on into the presentation. I actually have something that I want us to start us out with. I'm going to see if I can get this in the viewer here properly. So I have a jar here with some water. I gave it a little bit of color, if you can see on the screen. I had to run around the house. I actually didn't have any food coloring, so I had to get creative. So I found some of my hiking tablets with electrolytes. So it's kind of pink water, but it worked out. So just to think about this here with this mason jar of water, and of course I can move it different directions and so forth. So what I'm curious about, if we go to the next slide here, I'm curious about the different positions that I could turn that mason jar and what would happen to the water. In other words, what would be the water level if we were able to move the jar into that position? If we could draw a line, where would that line go? So what we'd like to do is I'd like to have you guys go into 2 different breakout rooms and have a quick discussion about this. Now, what I've done is I've created a jam board for you to be able to actually draw the line where the water would go. And so what I'd like you to do you'll end up in 1 of 2 breakout rooms with a few of your colleagues. And what I'd like you to do is talk to your colleagues about where would the water go, and then have one of you go ahead and draw the line. So if you're in the slide deck, all you need is at least one of you in that slide deck, and I'll make sure everybody can share their screens. And so that way we can make sure that you can share your screen if you want to support others that may be on their phones and it may be hard for them to see that. Paola, would you mind adding screen sharing for everyone? If you go down to screen sharing and just tap that menu, we should be able to say multiple participants and something like that. So, Paola, do you think we have 2 breakout rooms ready to go?
I'm setting them up too then, right? Okay.
Yeah, 2 just automatically. Yeah, that would be fantastic. Thank you so much.
Mm-hmm.
While she's setting that up, are there any questions about what we're about to do? Great. Go ahead and just click on that breakout room and go ahead and join that group of your colleagues. All right. I think we're all back. Hey, welcome back, everybody. So that was kind of interesting, right? Thinking about where the water level might be for each of those different positions. You may have had the urge to want to have the actual physical objects so that you could actually maneuver it, right? And kind of see what the dynamic would be with that. So what I want you to think about with that is, what type of thinking and reasoning were you using to figure out where the water level would be? And what type of language were you using to communicate your prediction? I had a moment to drop in a breakout room, and just right away I heard people trying to use language to communicate where that water level would be. And that was really interesting to me to think about. So as we go through our time together today, this is what you're walking out with by the time we get to 9:50 or a little before. Or 10:50 actually. Define spatial reasoning and share compelling reasons for young children to engage in it. I'm a pretty practical person, and I think it's really important for us to have compelling reasons to push anything into our extended learning time that we have with kids. And I think there's some really compelling reasons to include spatial reasoning as part of the work we do with kids. Identify opportunities for young children to engage in spatial reasoning. So I have a term that I think I've coined. I call it rip-offable. So I think you should walk out of here with some rip-offable stuff. So that's where we're going today. Let's move a little further. So as I asked you to and kind of nudge you to think about what you were doing, what you were engaged in, what that thinking sounded like, let's think about some possible definitions for spatial reasoning. One could be that location of objects, their shapes, their relations to each other, the paths they take as they move. The idea of locating, orienting, decomposing, recomposing, shifting dimensions, balancing, diagramming, symmetrizing, that's hard to say, isn't it? Navigating, transforming, comparing, scaling, feeling, visualizing, and that's by Brent Davis, who wrote a great book around spatial reasoning. So let's get to the compelling reasons though. This is what I call the so what moment. Like, what's the so what with spatial reasoning? There's 5 compelling reasons there. I linked the article at the bottom. It's really about a 3 to 4 page article. I highly recommend it. It really fleshes these reasons out better than I will in this short time we have. So please make sure you go back and check that out. But here are the 5 that they mention in the article. Spatial reasoning and mathematical thinking are intimately linked. Spatial reasoning can be improved. It's malleable. What's really cool about spatial reasoning is it's not this fixed trait that kids are born with. Now, traditionally, that's something that's being reinforced along with the whole idea you're a math person and you're not a math person. Same kind of thing with spatial reasoning, maybe even a little bit more so. So the great thing is all the research has shown this is a malleable thing that kids can get better at. I think that's pretty important to acknowledge. Number 3, spatial thinking is an important predictor of achievement in STEM careers. We'll talk a little bit about that as we go. Spatial reasoning is currently an underserved area of mathematics instruction. Short history lesson, spatial reasoning, and really what we call STEM now, before the 1900s, even in the 1800s and before, when people studied these disciplines, they were way more connected, and spatial reasoning was something that was very connected to things. In the early 1900s, as we started doing modern schooling, we separated everything into separate subjects and topics, and that really pushed spatial reasoning to the side, and it's really been devalued up until recently. In fact, if you go Google educational research on this, a lot of it's actually out of Canada, and so there's really not even a lot going on in the States right now about spatial reasoning. So it's not cutting edge because it's not new, but it's something that's been sort of put off to the side. So that's something you should probably know, because if you do it with students, you can really be understanding and extended learning. You're bringing something that they may not be getting in the regular classroom in the regular day. I think that's pretty important, right? And the 5th one, or 4th one, excuse me. Spatial reasoning is currently an underserved area. Oh, I mentioned that one. Let's go to the next one. Number 5, spatial reasoning provides multiple entry points and equitable access for mathematics. So there's great equity implications for spatial reasoning. And we'll talk about those as we go. Well, in reviewing those 5 reasons, which one is the most compelling to you? Do you mind popping that in the chat? Which number? If in the chat, you could just give me which is the most compelling to you and maybe a quick phrase of why. If you could add that to the chat, that would be great. So far we have some responses around this idea of empowerment and encouraging inquiry, that idea of eliminating barriers to access. Check out Carlos's comment about no limits, and Bill's tagging on to that as well. So great points. As we continue to look at those ideas coming on the chat, I wanted to share one other piece here before I give you some more things to explore and some ideas to rip off. Um, I was so fortunate over the last couple of years, really the last year, to be involved in an early math grant. And yes, you read that right. It says ages 0 to 8. So you're probably thinking, what was I doing with a 3-month-old with spatial reasoning? So I work with my colleagues in early education, and they actually have a toddler program in addition to preschool programs that they support. And we did this work ages 0 to 8 around spatial reasoning. And there were a couple of conclusions I walked away with by the end of this program. Here's the first one. Spatial reasoning is an effective overarching umbrella for STEAM lessons and STEAM units that we create or that we adopt. And this is what I mean by this. One of the things as somebody who supports mathematics that I've noticed over the years is many STEAM or STEM lessons, many of them are really science lessons where we try to pull in other content areas. And sometimes it seems a little forced. I don't know if anybody else identifies with that, is that sometimes we say to ourselves, is this a science lesson or is it a STEM lesson or is it a STEAM lesson? And sometimes it feels like we're trying to find where these other content areas live in that particular lesson. The cool thing about spatial reasoning is it can be that overarching umbrella where we can look at the spatial reasoning that's going on, and that can organize and connect all those other content areas in a very natural and authentic way. So that was a big aha for me, because as somebody that was trying to support mathematics and STEM areas, I found that I was sort of in the back end of things trying to make things fit. But if we look at spatial reasoning, that gives us an umbrella for all the content areas to connect together. So I thought that was pretty cool. The second thing is, I just am so excited about how spatial reasoning is a vehicle for revealing the brilliance of our students. There is a lot of access to spatial reasoning. There's ways that kids can display their ingenuity and things that they've come up with themselves. I think that is so important in a system of our schooling, which many times sorts our students into kids that can do something and cannot do something, and really doesn't give them an opportunity to show their brilliance. When I was working with some students in some different schools, one of the things some of the teachers noticed was some of the students that had not traditionally been successful in a particular class period of mathematics, when they were engaged in spatial reasoning, they were very successful in that. That's really huge because that's going to spill over into their other mathematics as they engage in spatial reasoning. So just as a couple other ways to think about it, in chemistry, as we're looking at molecules and so forth, that is another area where we can think about where spatial reasoning is important. This whole idea of 2D to 3D is really kind of something that we just throw upon students. In fact, one of the things that I learned about in this work is that chemistry teachers sometimes have a lot of trouble supporting their students in thinking about this three-dimensional model of a molecule, because it's many times the first time kids have had to think about something going from 2D to 3D. Many careers, including dentistry, have a big focus and even sort of like a filter of people that are able to engage in spatial reasoning. And as you think about the person that might have had a cleaning device going as they're cleaning your teeth, you can think about how they had to retrain their brain to think in a different way in terms of the spatial reasoning things of that. And here's a photo from one of the classes that I was working with, and a student being able to, build this parallelogram here, and just the satisfaction of them building something and having it come out, and then me talking to them about that really has a huge impact on students. So enough of me talking about stuff. I want you to get a chance to explore some things that you can take back to your environment. So how can we help students develop spatial intelligence? We can help them by engaging them in activities. And I want you to be able to explore some of these activities I have loaded up for you today. And the other piece to this that I want you to think about as you're exploring the activities is this notion of students using spatial language to describe what they're exploring. The cool thing about spatial reasoning activities is they lend themselves to students using certain descriptors, some certain language that helps them describe what's going on and how things are being manipulated. There's a link to that particular slide there that has some spatial language, that has some examples. It's not a comprehensive list, but just some ways for you to think about some words that kids can use to describe what they see when they start manipulating things. So here's what I have planned for you. It is choose your own adventure. So you're going to get a few minutes here. I'm doing a time check. We're at 10:28. I'm going to give you about 7 or 8 minutes. And what I'd like you to do is I'd like you to explore some spatial reasoning activities that I have loaded up for you. Let me tell you my thinking on this. The way I'm organizing this is these are things that can be done face-to-face with students or also in a digital space. I'm kind of on a mission to think about unhomework that we can have kids do. I coined that term unhomework. What I mean by unhomework is if you look at the screen, see where it says slides 12 and 13, that above that, that's a shape puzzle. If kids were doing shape puzzles in school, in extended learning, and then they're like, wow, I can't wait to come back tomorrow. And you say to them, hey, you don't have to wait till tomorrow. I have a digital version of shape puzzles that you can go home and explore. Can you imagine how fired up the kids would be? Because then they're thinking like, I can continue doing this at home. So the idea is to have something that is a face-to-face activity, but also have that digital equivalent. So I'm starting to collect those type of pairings. And so I have some of those for you to explore today. So if you want to explore shape puzzles, check out slides 12 and 13 and the links that are associated with those. If you want to check out which one doesn't belong, which is another structure that can be done face-to-face or digital, check out slides 14 and 15. If you want to check out the idea of putting shapes together and taking shapes apart, the slides 16 and 17. By the way, the kinder geometry program and even in the first grade standards, kinder standards and first grade standards really boil down to, with geometry, putting shapes together, taking shapes apart. That really is the overarching theme. Can you imagine if kids in extended learning are already doing those types of things and how much that's going to support them in the regular classroom? So folks, I'm going to put 7 minutes on the clock, there's no breakout rooms for this. I just want you to have some independent time to explore. When we come back together, I'm going to ask you to be ready to talk about what are some things that you're thinking about doing with these with your own students. Please hit some questions to me in the chat, or just unmute yourself as you're going through this if you want to talk about it. So go ahead and start the work. We'll come back together at about 10:38. Thanks, everybody. All right, folks, if we could come back together. I imagine that some of you are deep into the Mathagon site. I think I would have got lost down that rabbit hole. Isn't that site amazing? Lots of cool stuff in there for sure. I'm sure some of you check that out. So just a couple of things as we come back together. I want you to think about this idea of structured play. As you think about your students and the people that you support, that you're supporting them with their students, think about this idea of structured play and how students might be able to engage in something that they are directing, but there can be this support with you or your teachers that you work with, encouraging them to come alongside students and asking them questions about what they're engaged in, what they notice, what if they move something around, what if they did something a little differently, just sparking that thinking that way. But I really want to make sure that I've left you with this idea of the students are driving the thinking. And that's what I really am excited about with this structured play idea. And that's really, I believe it's really connected to the brilliance piece I mentioned earlier. When students are able to take their direction in something, we are more able to get an opportunity to peek into their brilliance because it's something that they originated, they came up with. They're bringing all of their background, whether that be cultural or just their background of other things that they've learned about, into that setting. And I think that's pretty exciting. So just one more thing that I want to make sure that we do before we wrap up here is, as I'm super excited to hear about your context. And so how will you apply these resources in your context? I'm wondering if people would be willing to put some ideas in the chat. or even if we don't have a ton of people in here, we have enough, we don't have too many people that we could unmic and share a couple ideas. So I'm curious what you're thinking. I know your colleagues are curious about taking ideas from some of you that have already thought of some. So please put an idea in the chat, or please unmic yourself and, or unmute yourself actually, and share an idea that you're thinking about.
Mark, this is Bill Dobson from my academy. The way we're going to use this, I'm the assistant director, so I'm going to share these ideas. We've talked about them with our small staff, but I'm going to share some of the ideas that I'm hearing here today that you're sharing and reading in the chat with our teachers to try to help. We're a non-classroom based independent study school where our teachers meet with students one-on-one. So we're going to try to integrate these types of things in all of our one-on-one meetings with kids, because we can use these type of concepts across all the core subject areas, whether we're putting together a map of the United States or whatever it is. So there's a lot of different ways that we can use this. And then I wanted to add that for 2 years before I ventured into what I'm doing now, I taught elementary physical education right in downtown LA. And on Fridays, we had free Fridays where I broke kids up in small groups of anywhere from 4 to 6. I did set some boundaries with some cones, but I let them make up the rules for any game that they wanted to do. And that was a phenomenal thing that I found that helped everything from school discipline and listening and order, and just the classroom teachers were raving about how kids started to be able to, they felt, connect what they saw them doing in PE with what they were asking them to do in class. So I think there's a great overlap and relationship potential there, rather than just kind of cutting kids loose at recess. I think that's really great. But if you can pull small groups together and say, hey, make a game. And that way they're kind of trying to connect everything together instead of complete free play.
Right. That's great, Bill. It really makes me think of that respect and power piece too, by giving over this power to kids for them to generate something. The amount of respect you're giving them, but you're also empowering them. And again, what that does to letting them share their brilliance around coming up with a new idea. That's great. Thanks for sharing, Bill. Other ideas?
How you doing? Carlos Acosta from Gompers Prep in San Diego, California. This looks like something I would definitely start with kits, probably right now that we're virtual or distance, is probably start with some kits so that way students can get their hands on with the blocks and kind of create those, that get that hook on them. And then once we get that hook, add these to our Google Sites. We have Google Classrooms within our program. So allowing the students to have these as links. And then we like to build leadership within our students. Right now that we're virtual and we're in their home, we ask them to teach their younger siblings, because a lot of them have younger siblings, things of that sort. And these are activities they can do with their younger siblings or bring their parents in and be involved with them. So I think this is something we can definitely tie in together.
Great points, Carlos. The thing that I'm really tagging on to what you said is that idea of multi-age environments in terms of kids and siblings and so forth. The thing about these spatial reasoning, they're not connected to one grade level standard, and they're really nice that way. So I didn't point that out. I appreciate you doing that, Carlos. Yeah.
Hello, my name is Carlos Herrero from Sparks at Calexico, and I'm glad that I have a couple of coworkers in this session. Shout out to them, to my team, and definitely gonna take this back. Maybe as we can start as a brain break, because we're doing still virtual classes. So maybe at the beginning of the class we can give the kids one of these so they can have their brain juices working, and because I took my time with a couple of these. Okay, so I think the kids are gonna love this for sure, and appreciate that you share all these resources with us.
Nice. There's something about what you said about brain break, that idea of like our brains just having a chance to sort of like kind of wake up and do something interesting. Sometimes with students and in an extended day or in regular day, kids have much baggage that comes with certain types of learning because they've had perhaps different degrees of success. The thing about spatial activities that they many times have sort of a lower a level playing field and this level of access that allows kids to jump in without sort of having this preconceived notion of something that they're thinking like, oh my gosh, I'm not sure if I can be successful in that. So you know, as I kind of wrap up here, I just want to give you a couple other examples that we're talking about STEM careers, we're talking about you know, many other things, but the more I study this, the more I see this is all over our everyday life. I saw a video clip once of a gentleman trying to get his carry-on baggage up into the overhead bin on a flight, and how he was trying to turn it around like 4 different ways to try to see how it would fit. Many of us have tried to pack the back of a car and tried to see like how we're going to figure out how things will be. So not only is this something that can promote academic support, but wow, it's something that we might even actually use in our everyday lives. And isn't it interesting how it is one of those things when we get to be adults, we say, oh, I'm not so good at that, and you know, that's something I have my spouse do instead of me because it's not my strength. But the great thing is this is malleable. This is something that is not something that you're just a fixed thing. A quote I like to leave you with: spatial reasoning at age 3, this quote just blows me away. At age 3 was a better predictor of general arithmetic abilities at age 5 than language or even general math skills. So what this shares with me, even if you don't work with 3-year-olds, that the younger the kids are that we work with in spatial reasoning, there's just these dividends. Some of them, they haven't been able to quite even prove why it happens, but this idea of spatial reasoning early really can pay dividends with math skills later. So to me, that's a great opportunity for extended learning. It's something where you all can really enrich the regular education environment by the spatial reasoning work that you do. Folks, it's been a pleasure to be with you this short time today. I encourage you to think about these questions, about how you might deepen your learning around this topic. You know, this is a multi-day conference, and so you're probably going to be on overload at some point of thinking about like all the different presentations, and they might all blur together. So you might want to think of just writing down a quick action step for yourself on this particular session, so that way it doesn't get jumbled with everything else. And please let me be a resource to you. I tweet mainly about math education and equity, and so if you follow me, that's what you'll be hearing about. So just great to be with you all today. I'm gonna let you make sure that you are logging off and have a couple minutes of change in your pocket, but we did drop a link in the chat of the evaluation link. We'd really appreciate any feedback. The conference organizers like that feedback so that they can know what worked and what didn't. Folks, a real pleasure. Take care of yourselves.